NPR's theme song was playing on the kitchen speakers when the kettle clicked off. As I was pouring my morning tea, which has been Earl Grey with oat milk for more than 10 years, I saw that the snow had begun to stick to the outside. The world beyond my window became softer as thick white flakes adhered to the porch railings. A snowplow moaned somewhere in the distance. When I looked at the time, it was 6:47 a.m., still early enough to avoid the traffic on the way to Synergy Corps headquarters. Or it was, I traced the shape of the porcelain mug in my hand with my thumb. Blue. The handle cracks faintly a present from Mark, my former assistant, following our achievement of $20 million in recurrent income. The card had said, for the woman who actually made the engine run. Even after they had taken everything else, I had retained it. Why I carried it to Pace every day, my new office, my new team was still a mystery to me. It had taken on the role of an anchor, a memory of my creation, as well as what they attempted to remove. I served as the vice president of operations at Synergy Corps, a mid-sized data infrastructure firm that was at the forefront of enterprise logistics AI integration 2 years ago. I had contributed to its growth from a startup in a Longmont barn to a 300-person powerhouse with contracts all across the West Coast. The first 10 engineers were hired by me. I oversaw the development of our complete array of APIs. For the first 6 months, I even mended the coffee maker as no one else bothered to read the instruction booklet. Titles didn't matter to me. Building something with integrity was important to me, which in retrospect may have been the first indication that I wasn't a fit in the C-suite. When Ryan LeClaire, the new CEO, took over, everything changed. Wharton MBA, all jargon and teeth. Every meeting ended with a smug pause that gave you the impression that you had missed something, even though you hadn't. And he began every sentence with, "Let me challenge that." Initially, he appeared to be eager, requested reports that I had already put together, watched stand-ups without taking part. He remarked, "Learning the ropes." However, it became apparent what he was actually doing. He was taking a list of persons observing who put him to the test, who postponed, who might be persuaded. I witnessed it. I didn't flinch, though I didn't fear criticism. I had documents, information, proof of the processes I had established, the savings we had made, and the confidence I had gained. What I was lacking was defense. In businesses such as Synergy Corps, loyalty is discussed similarly to organic kombucha. Everyone says they love it, but nobody wants to pay for it. The instant you lose your strategic status, you turn into ballast. I still didn't anticipate it, not entirely, not until the quarterly meetings Monday. Over the weekend, I worked on improving our operations dashboard. I was pleased to report that the new logistics algorithm we had put in place had reduced delivery lag time across 3 providers by 14%. Our staff was more productive despite being thinner than before. I had a well-designed slideshow. Accurate, rooted in reality. Early that morning, I entered the conference room to find stale donuts and clothes streaked with snow. I placed my blue cup or mug next to the laptop. It stood like a silent observer next to the projector. After 10 minutes, I noticed it. The change. While I was presenting, Ryan reclined in his chair. He folded his arms, then just once leaned forward to speak to the CFO in a whisper. They failed to nod. They didn't even make an effort to appear intrigued. I glanced around to see Ryan standing there when I reached the last slide, which showed a projected cost savings of $2.3 million over the upcoming fiscal year. He used the tone that most people save for toddlers when he said, "I appreciate that, Mara." I have one more thing to talk about before we wrap up. The room became silent. We are starting a strategic reorganization of our operations department with immediate effect. My fingers remained over the trackpad while my mouth dried up. Operations will be consolidated under business development beginning next week, with Mia Calden serving as the interim lead, my former intern Mia. There was a pause, not quiet but paralysis, and nobody glanced at me or moved. Ryan clarified, saying, "This decision is a necessary pivot as we scale toward more agile integration, not a reflection of performance." I blinked. "I appreciate your years of service, Mara." That was it. Not even a document to sign. No private discussion, just a public beheading, cloaked as a promotion for someone else. I shut down my laptop, grabbed my blue cup, and left the room as if I had just finished making tea. They were unaware of what I had already started, and they couldn't have known I never felt comfortable using the word revenge. I didn't plan it. However, I also possessed foresight, the sort you learn from being undervalued, not from ambition. I took a while to return home. I entered the building's side stairs after leaving that glass-walled area, which was one of those poorly lighted, seldom-used concrete towers that had a little odor of insulation and leftover lunches. For a full 10 minutes, I stood on the landing with my blue cup in both hands, steam rising in thin curls. I wasn't crying at the time, and I wasn't upset either. Instead, it was a hollow, reverberating silence, the sort that follows an earthquake and causes you to start feeling for your own heartbeat. The element that surprised me was that although I didn't feel humiliated, I did feel erased. Not only had they taken away my title, but they had also changed the plot while I was still present. Strategic restructure. Not a reflection of performance. Mia will take point. Mia, whom I had trained, was intelligent, but she was still inexperienced. She didn't know the names of the vendors which regional account manager required a call every Friday to avoid a 72-hour delay in invoice approvals, or which suppliers' API lags during snowstorms. She would now be point. I bundled all of my memories of missed vacation weekends, birthdays, and holidays spent on Zoom calls with Tokyo, Dublin, and Seattle into a spreadsheet that Ryan could show the board as if it had always been his goal. That day, I hadn't returned to my office yet. I drove instead. I had no destination, only movement and just enough quiet to allow the racket within to subside. My Subaru was still wearing winter tires, and the highway heading toward Netherland was largely clear. It made me grin as I pulled up to a gas station with an ancient payphone outside and a sign that said, "Now, hiring part-time. No drama." I didn't contact anyone yet, not even Liz, so I waited in the parking lot and watched the snow fall while pouring myself an awful but hot cup of gas station coffee. Liz had been my friend and coworker for nearly a decade, and she was the only person at Synergy Corps I would still trust with a family secret or a bank password. However, I needed time to think things through before allowing her words to influence my feelings. Instead, I opened my notebook, not the laptop provided by the firm, but my own spiral-bound pad that I maintained for ideas that came to me on an instinctual level, flipped to a blank page and penned 5 lines. I constructed the base. I noticed the transition too late. They failed to consider the long term. My knowledge is still mine. They are unable to perceive my selections. For a long time I gazed at those words, since they were accurate. I'm not naive. I've been in this business long enough to spot a power move masquerading as synergy, and I could already feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, 2 months before Ryan even said, restructure. It began modestly. Budget allocations were changed, but only after I had already negotiated conditions. Vendor meetings were rescheduled without my presence. I was oddly left out of Slack threads, and Mia had been participating in an increasing number of conversations asking questions that I used to respond to while I slept. The lunch followed. Liz texted me later to let me know that Ryan had taken 2 of your merchants out today, which was okay because I didn't want to waste an afternoon watching him chat over grilled salmon. Strange, isn't it? My stomach tightened. It was well coordinated and not strange. After returning home that evening, I launched the little silent side business I had begun during the pandemic. An LLC I had named Elm Root Systems. In reality, it was merely a consulting umbrella for independent contractors, but I had kept the paperwork organized, filled out the EIN, and even filed annual reports just in case. And now there was, just in case. That kind of petty hatred wasn't in my DNA, and I didn't want Ryan fired or humiliated. I didn't want revenge. Not the scorched earth kind. Ownership was what I wanted. I wanted to be the owner of my time, knowledge, and relationships, the ones I had carefully built, rather than bought. I also desired a fresh start and clarity. I thus called a person I hadn't spoken to in a long time, Adler Jonah. We attended graduate school together. He had chosen to pursue venture finance and had established a small, quiet investment business in Denver that focused on growing vendor infrastructure for mid-sized logistics companies. The following morning, while it was still snowing and NPR was humming in the background, I called him from my kitchen. Jonah. I responded, I just want to get an idea in front of someone. I trust I'm not pitching or requesting a favor. His response was straightforward. When did I not answer your call? Mara. We had an outline before the end of that hour. Nothing is flawless, but it was feasible. Northcrate Logistics, his vendor, had been having trouble with bloat. They were good at what they did, which was modular supply chain software, but they were awful at streamlining. I had previously dealt with them, so I was aware of their shortcomings as well as their potential. Despite not being fancy or having the word AI in their name, they powered actual systems for actual customers, such as Synergy Core. Ryan had bet his Q1 bonuses on the project, which included the full data routing. I didn't actually laugh, I did. However, glance at my blue cup once more. Half full, it was now cooling off, and it was still on the counter. I thought about what it signified as I raised it and felt the familiar weight in my palm. They believed they had taken my place. They were unaware that I had already begun constructing my own table. There was no sense of retaliation in the first contract. It was similar to breathing. By Friday, we had reworked the purchase bid for Northcrate Logistics under Elm Root Systems, with Jonah's fund fronting the funds and me identified as the strategic operator post-close. Jonah moved faster than I honestly remembered. When I initially received Liz's text, the ink wasn't even dry. Liz, what's going on? Ryan just got off a call with Northcrate and they sent him to someone in Pace. After a lengthy moment of staring at the screen, I typed, erased, and typed again. I believe they have new management. I said just enough uncertainty to maintain the whispers, no emojis, no explanation. There was a reason I had kept the move quiet. I wanted clarity, not praise, and to see what would happen when the Golden Boy CEO discovered the air he was breathing. Wasn't his Elm Root now owned the backend that Northcrate had powered for Synergy Core's launch of their OpSync AI? The very idea Ryan had been pitching to investors throughout the quarter was mine. Nothing dodgy, just unnoticeable, unless you were looking closely. We had filtered everything through holding structures, clean paper trails, and normal merger language, so the relationship wasn't immediately apparent, which Ryan wasn't. Of course, he was too preoccupied with pitching, posturing, and behaving like the type of leader that tech blogs with names like ScaleX and Visionary Fuel write blurbs about. The problem with males like Ryan is that they believe that the spotlight has the power. They forget that the wiring is where the actual work is done. It was like watching a tremor creep under the floors over the following week. An innocent calendar invite was the first step. Subject vendor sync needed for Q1 operations. Sync update. Liz sent it to me. It seems that Mia accepted the invitation without recognizing that the person identified as the lead vendor liaison was actually Elm Root Systems Strategic Ops. I answered the phone. Not Ryan, not Mia. However, I accepted it, and I merely said what was necessary. All correspondence will go through Elm Root's client engagement team, and future deliverables will need to be reviewed under revised licensing terms due to recent changes in operational oversight. After a little silence, the other person said, I apologize. Could you please tell me who I'm talking to? They were unable to notice my smile. You might recognize me from your previous implementation phase. My name is Mara Leland. A quick inhalation. Another pause. I'll need to escalate this internally. Follows. I thought you would. By Wednesday, Liz called me in a hushed voice from her car. They're rushing. I smiled because she was whispering. As I passed Ryan's office, I noticed that he was pacing, in fact. Pacing Mara. Mia appeared to be about to cry. It seems that they attempted to implement a new license agreement but were met with resistance. While drinking tea from my now iconic blue cup, I remarked, That's a shame. They're beginning to piece things together. A DevOps person saw that the vendor account IDs had changed, and while your name isn't on it, your signature is the system architecture, she meant. She was correct. Although I hadn't considered it that way before, I had left blueprints instead of fingerprints. I returned to the house where I had grown up that weekend. My father had died the previous year, and I hadn't had the stomach to go through his stuff until now. Perhaps I was putting things off, or perhaps I simply needed a place that hadn't changed. In my mother's handwriting, I discovered an old shoebox in the attic with the label, Kitchen Mara's Junk, a rusty metal thermos, a scrawled third-grade recipe for a banana peanut butter toast, and somehow the original brochure for Synergy Core's seed round launch party, from when we were 7 people in a co-working space with mismatched chairs, were all inside. She builds the bridges between vision and execution, was written next to my portrait on the back. For almost an hour, I sat on the attic floor with a thermos in my lap and a leaflet spread out on the dust-covered wood. I had not forgotten that version of myself. But they had Monday morning arrived quickly. An internal newsletter published by Synergy Corps was titled, Vendor Realignment Protocol Expected Temporary Disruption. About midday, the Slack leaks began. A vendor dashboard in a grainy screen grabbed red alarms. Access denied notifications, panic. Instead of gloating, I took a stroll around Verispace, where Elmroot had temporarily established itself in a corner office suite with a view of Boulder Creek, small but focused. My team was working on stabilizing vendor migration services for 2 new clients, one of whom ironically had turned down my proposal at Synergy Corps 2 years earlier, and was now impressed with Elmroot's flexibility. Isn't that the norm all the time? I received an unexpected call that evening, Grant Illa, during another so-called efficiency cycle. She was fired from Synergy Corps before I was, and the last I heard she was working as a consultant for NGOs. She was one of the best operations directors I had ever worked with. Hey, it's been a long time. She said, it has. I just wanted to say, I saw what you did. You pulled the thread, the right one, and you didn't burn the place down. I remained silent. She went on to say, and I'm proud of you, a lot of women in tech needed to witness this. Sometimes you just have to be irrefutable to be heard. That stayed with me, unquestionable, not harsh, not loud, but just indisputable. Ryan gave a call the following day. I didn't respond. His voicemail was left. I didn't pay attention. Rather, I used legal to send the following message. To Mr. Leclerc. According to the updated contract conditions, any correspondence pertaining to license or vendor migration must go via Elmroot Systems legal counsel. Regards, Leland. 5 minutes later, he replied with a single line. We must speak because everyone is impacted by this. I kept my hand steady as I gazed at the message for a long time. Because of the following, I wasn't attempting to illustrate a point, and I wasn't attempting to harm anyone. Not Mia, the product teams, or the engineers. All I wanted to do was get one back. My name, my job, my possession. History cannot be changed while the architect is still living. I was washing my blue ceramic mug at 6:42 a.m. when I received the email from Synergy Corps' board. Time-sensitive request for private consultation is the subject line. The house was silent, save for the muffled hum of the baseboard heater and the gentle ticking rhythm of the snow melting outside my window as I slowly dried my hands. Ruth Elston, the board chair, signed the note, formal, courteous, and almost contrite. Ms. Leland, we believe your perspective may help the board understand recent disruptions in our AI rollout timeline. We are currently reviewing strategic vendor partnerships and would greatly appreciate your insight regarding the recent changes at North Crate Logistics. We hope for a confidential conversation. As the heat from the mug soaked into my palms, I stood in my kitchen still barefoot reading it again. Making amends was not the reason they were calling. The marble had begun to break, which is why they were calling. I arrived at the meeting wearing a navy suit, which was understated neutral and tailored without being too gaudy. It left people wondering if you were going to propose a solution or give them a letter of resignation. Frost etched the edges of the windows like silent witnesses as I entered the boardroom of a small law office they had rented in downtown Denver at precisely 10 in the morning. Ruth, who appeared exhausted, got up to meet me. Mara, thank you for taking the time. Of course, I said, with a slight nod. 3 men and 3 women made up the 6 board members seated at the long table, and one of them, the CFO I knew, was unable to look me in the eye. Tension and a hint of bergamot filled the room. Ruth said cautiously, I know you've had recent involvement with North Crate. I do, I said. We completed the purchase 3 weeks ago, and now North Crate is owned by Elmroot Systems. Nobody said anything, so I continued. All API licensing support infrastructure and proprietary integrations that were previously provided to Synergy Corps are now managed by Elmroot in accordance with the terms of the contract. Again, silence. I gave them time to sit with it. I then placed a slim folder on the table after taking it out of my luggage. We've listed the previous licensing structure that Synergy Core is no longer eligible for, as well as the updated rate schedule that includes the 6-month continuity clause we provided as a courtesy. Ruth had anticipated this, so she didn't flinch. However, a man in a gray suit, possibly. Legal cleared his throat. Why didn't we know sooner, You just didn't realize it, I said, cocking my head. One more pause. I went on to say it's a leadership issue, not a vendor issue, that you gave authority to a CEO who didn't understand the systems he was depending on. It touched down. They moved about in their chairs. There were no cries or accusations, just the sound of the truth landing in its proper place. Ruth got back up before I went and said, "You've handled this with restraint. I didn't want to fight. I wanted my work to matter," I said, looking her in the eye. My blue mug steamed next to me on the cedar railing as I sat on my porch that night, covered in an old quilt, watching the wind stir snow across the pine trees. My phone buzzed with a voicemail. Ryan Play wasn't pressed by me. I did, however, read the transcription. "Mara, you've made your point. Just consider the people who are still employed here. They are the ones who are caught in the middle. I'm not sure what your ultimate goal is." It's funny. The individuals who were left behind to clean up the mess had not been given any thought when I had been shoved aside, so why now did he care? However, I wasn't upset or even resentful. I only sensed remoteness and a sort of tranquility. The board took action within a week. The news announcement used the phrase "transitioned out" to describe Ryan. No town hall, no fanfare, just a line from HR regarding new leadership. Darla Croft, a former head of product, was appointed as an interim CEO. She was a wise option since she had always been steady, never noisy, but constantly watching. Liz emailed me the company-wide email announcing the leadership change, which ended with a statement I never expected. In the meantime, Synergy Core's team worked feverishly to mend the damaged trust with clients, contractors, and even their own employees. We are grateful to Mara Leland for playing a crucial part in constructing the infrastructure that keeps our operations running. Just a name, no spin, no adjectives. My name. At last I received another type of email that same week. This one was from the Tech Talk Summit, an industry gathering that I had been at for more than 10 years. Usually as a panelist, but sometimes occasionally as an audience member. They wanted me to be the keynote speaker now. "When the system says you're replaceable and you prove it wrong," is the subject line. I looked at it for a while. I didn't say this because I was flattered, but rather because I recalled what it was like to believe it, to sit in meetings, use the appropriate words, and still feel cold, when you spoke to be too seasoned to be asked questions but never quite included. They wanted my narrative now, not because I used fire as a weapon, however I didn't. The evening before the keynote, Ila texted me once again. "Just say it for us, whatever you say up there." She was referring to women, the ones who remained silent in front of guys who were taking notes on what you had already said, the ones who were repeatedly told that being humble was the same as being invisible. That night I didn't get much sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about the initial review where I was labeled difficult. At the age of 29, I had inquired excessively about a difference in the budget, that was all. And in some way that made me challenging. Now, after all these years, it wasn't that I had ceased to ask inquiries. The distinction was that I no longer sought permission. The theater was packed. I brought my mug backstage, not as a crutch, but as a reminder, and I donned a charcoal blazer and a cobalt silk scarf, a subtle tribute to the color of my mug. I didn't start with statistics when I took the podium. I didn't start with product specifications or market trends. I told a story to start. I used to think that loyalty was the currency of leadership. I remarked, adding that you would be safe if you put in enough effort, stayed up late, and made yourself valuable enough. I stopped, and then one day I was told I was the bottleneck by someone I hardly knew, who also took credit for my work. There was a rustling in the audience, followed by memory recognition, and perhaps a few silent nods. I went on to say, but I wasn't the one holding things back. I was the one keeping it together. I held out my cup to close the conversation. This should have been on my desk for 10 years, not because it was beautiful, but because it served as a daily reminder that even the smallest things carried out with integrity have an impact. Applause that is steady, sincere, and not loud. It's the "I've been there" kind. Then I was approached by two women in their 50s, one of whom was crying. she said in a whisper. Thank you for saying what I've never been able to express. I unpacked the final box from my former life later that evening in my office. It contained a farewell note signed by 20 members of my Synergy Core team. Mia's included. You taught me what structure with compassion looks like. I'm still learning from you, she had written at the bottom. I cradled the message to my chest and let out a breath I hadn't let out in a long time, but I didn't cry. It wasn't retaliation. It was made available. A year later, I stood in the bright foyer of Elmroot Systems' new offices, not as someone who had been let go, but as someone who had let go after carrying the blue ceramic mug out of Synergy Core in a simple cardboard box of having to be picked, of requiring gratitude, of standing by to be observed. Since I took the decision to choose myself, everything has changed. It had polished concrete floors, windows that framed the Rockies like an oil painting, a line of pine trees dusted with spring snow in front of my new office, and a framed picture of my father smiling in front of the shed, where I learned how to fix things on the shelf next to my desk. My new team, which included 2 project leads, 13 engineers, and our new COO. Ela came into the conference room at precisely 8:30. That Ela indeed. She hadn't hesitated when I offered her the position. She had joined Elmroot 2 months prior after concluding a contract with a Seattle organization. She declared, I want to build something that's mine, so it's time to stop fixing other people's houses. All of us did. One of the 12 client migrations we assessed that morning had 3 previous Synergy Core contracts, and one of them had publicly stated that they didn't accept operational strategy advice from individuals who hadn't given a TED Talk. They now desired a long-term license contract. It's funny how when the paint begins to flake, clarity emerges. However, we didn't boast or embarrass ourselves, we simply created. We were tidy, cautious, and focused. Liz texted me later that day from her new position at a company that specializes in climate analytics. Liz, I recently attended a panel on vendor resilience, and Elmroot was described as the gold standard. I chuckled quietly before responding, I thought I was the bottleneck, which is weird. A surprise arrived 2 weeks after the keynote. No return address, just a box. Inside is a little wooden frame with a gold-typed sentence printed on it. The people who made innovation possible are the true legacy of innovation, not the product, in small lettering beneath it, M. Leland. The plaque was all that was present, no signature or remark. I put it directly above the cup on my bookcase. The fact that someone, possibly many someones, had heard the message was more important than who sent it. I didn't say that at the microphone, but the one I lived every day in silence, that you can get your name back without screaming. Knowing where to burn is what gives one respect, not the lack of fire. That leadership is a steady hand in the dark, not a flashlight. The last thread was a surprise. I noticed her as I was leaving a lunch meeting, Mia. She appeared to be older, but not by years, as she stood close to a bakery on Pearl Street. She was reading a poster on women in tech leadership in the window. When she first noticed me, I could have continued to walk. However, I didn't. I moved forward and said, Hi, Mia. Startled, she turned, and then her expression softened. She paused and blinked, saying, Mara, I didn't believe I'd ever see you. Boulder's small that way, I said with a smile. She nodded. I'm sorry for how everything went down. I was in over my head, and I didn't say anything, she said with an uneasy beat. I remarked, You were young and in a bad situation. I let them use me to replace you, and you were the only one who treated me like I had potential, she said, lowering her gaze. They removed me, Mia. That's different, I said, shaking my head. They didn't replace me. Slowly, she nodded. Then, following a pause, You created something superior. I simply smiled without responding. She gave me a small item from her suitcase before we parted ways. A sheet of folded paper. She remarked, I kept this. It reminded me what real leadership looks like from my first month working under you. I unfolded it in my car later. I hardly recalled writing the sticky note. When a system malfunctions, integrity is how we respond, and my initials in small letters beneath it. I returned home that evening and opened the closet that contained the final relics of my Synergy Core years, including the first printed project plan, the old badge, and the farewell notes. I went through them. Then I threw most of it away for the first time, with a sense of release, not rage. I just kept 3 items: the mug, the quote frame, the sticky note. Other than that, I had already lived and didn't need to cling to it. Because my story had never been theirs in the first place, I was now working on the following chapter. No longer was my name at the bottom of someone else's slideshow. It has a glass engraving on it, on my own business's entrance, on 100 client contracts letterhead. According to the woman's words, "You gave me hope that I could too." I still occasionally remember the day Ryan fired me, the boardroom's silence, the way nobody raised their eyes. Just before I closed the laptop, my hand was hovering over the trackpad. Then I remember how I left no rage, no spectacle, just a woman carrying a blue mug filled with items that nobody in the room had ever bothered to look at. And that's when I got started, not finished. Because you can win the war without winning the battle. All you need to do is know who you are. And do not allow them to persuade you to forget it.